Thousands in Baghdad are gathered to mourn the death of Iran's top military commander, Qassem Soleimani. A funeral procession was held for him this morning and for the commander of an Iraqi militia group, who was also killed in the airstrike. Friday's attack, authorized by U.S. President Donald Trump, has escalated tensions between Iran and the United States. Well, for more on the story, we've reached out to Leah West. Now, she's a lecturer on international affairs at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. She also served with the Canadian Armed Forces for 10 years as an armored officer and deployed to Afghanistan in 2010. She joins us now from Ottawa. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it on what is, of course, a huge story. Let's talk about the legal authorization in terms of the U.S. president, without notifying members of Congress, to execute a high-ranking Iranian general in the sovereign territory of a neighboring country, Iraq. Walk us through how that might be justified.
Yeah, so as you described it there, you can tell that it's pretty complicated. And it is a little bit hard to tell whether or not the legal authorizations were met or the necessary requirements were met, because we do not have the intelligence that the United States government had in making this decision. But ultimately, if this was a case of self-defense, which is has not actually been said by anyone in the government, they haven't come out and actually used that term. This is a strike that would have been executed under the president's Article 2 authority, which is really quite broad. Really, he has to be taking action that's limited to protect U.S. interests. And that seems to be pretty clear here. But there has been some legal opinions in the past from the U.S. that said if there's likely retaliation or strong retaliation, then the president should be seeking to consult with Congress, which we know wasn't done. But in terms of the domestic authorizations, Article 2 would have been the basis for that. The other question is the international law implications here, whether or not this strike really was justified in self-defense. The starting premise that international law is that you can't use force against another state. And here the action was taken against an Iranian general, so this would be an act of force against Iran, taken presumably in self-defense, but a really aggressive interpretation, I would argue, of the theory of self-defense. The United States typically takes very permissive interpretations of self-defense and the related doctrine, but this is could be seen as especially aggressive depending on the imminence of the attack.
We're seeing people in the streets of Tehran, and of course, we're seeing people in the streets of Baghdad, because that is where the killing took place. Also, the death of an Iraqi militia leader there as well. So what is the involvement of Iraq in all of this? How does that complicate the situation?
It really does complicate it, because the United States is in Iraq on the government's consent. So the Iraqi government consents to the United States being there, and essentially the terms with which the United States is there. And the Iraqi government had told the U.S. in the past that it did not want the United States using its proximity to Iran inside Iraq as a way of executing military operations against Iran. From what we seem to know from the United States is that Iraq was told of the strike, which would make sense. They would want to ensure that there were no friendly casualties, but they were not consulted. So basically warned in advance. Typically, again, to use force in a third-party state, you need the consent of that state. Or there is a doctrine at international law called the unwilling and able doctrine. So if a third-party state isn't willing or able to protect, in this case, the United States troops or do anything about Soleimani, then the United States theory is that they could attack in their own self-defense inside Iraq, because Iraq wasn't willing or able, in this case it would be willing, to do anything about it.
Very quickly in the time we have left, just want you to comment, if you could, on the potential jeopardy for the region itself, not only U.S. assets, but potentially Canadians, because we are in the region as well. What danger do you think, particularly troops, but also diplomats and those traveling, doing business there, could be in as a result of this?
Well, the Iranians have said that they will seek revenge for this action. And given how the Iranians operate, they don't typically engage in, direct kinetic military action. They engage in asymmetric warfare. So you could see Iranian proxies in Iraq or in Lebanon, Syria, Afghanistan even, potentially Yemen or Saudi Arabia, take action against the United States or U.S. allies that are in the region. Canada does have about 250 troops in Iraq, as they are leading a NATO training mission. So they could potentially be targets. The other thing I'll say is that if Iraq, upset by the United States' actions, withdraws its consent, the American forces would have to leave the region, which would also put the stability or the future of that NATO training mission in jeopardy.